Good afternoon, Edwardsville students and guests. Today, we begin what I am probably going to call Bias Week. And that's because Mr. Baker has bias. We all have it. And I am going to talk about a series of people I don't particularly like. I'm not, ever since I had the ability to vote in 1984, I have voted since then. But I don't particularly like anybody who's a candidate for a major party, so I didn't vote for them. I voted for some strange, obscure people who had weird ideas. And I have not yet voted for a guy with a boot on his head, but there may be a day. So, last I saw you, we spoke about Gerald Ford becoming president after Watergate. And Ford, of course, was appointed to be vice president during the Nixon administration because Spiro Agnew, the elected vice president of the United States, had some problems with tax fraud. And so he recognized he was a problem for Nixon, so he resigned. Nixon then had a vice president who was appointed by the Senate, and when Nixon resigned, Ford moved up to be the president. Maybe we'll talk about Ford today. I have to admit I don't dislike Ford, but I know that he was considered sort of a lame duck in that he was the only president we've ever had who was not elected to the executive branch. And Ford was sort of the golden boy of American politics. He was the Pericles of our time. You may remember that Pericles was the champion of the trireme rowers for Athens during the Peloponnesian War, and afterwards he enjoyed their support politically. And he was the golden boy of Athens. Unfortunately, he got typhus and died during the plague that struck during the Peloponnesian War. Pericles supported the trireme wars during the Greek-Persian wars. Well, anyway, after the Battle of Salamis, that gained him much support. So Gerald Ford was a little bit like that. Gerald Ford was, was at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, some Ivy League quarterback. He was a scholar. He was a great politician. The way you think of the possibilities for that good-looking young Joseph Stalin, those same possibilities came true for Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was selected by the Senate to be the vice president because he was one of the most successful Republican politicians in our democracy. But the concept of Gerald Ford was tainted, of course, because he took over the vice presidency from a guy who engaged in tax fraud. He took over the presidency from a guy who tried to cover up a break-in and then tried to cover up the cover-up by firing the attorney general, the assistant attorney general, etc. And then when the Watergate tapes were revealed, it turned out that you couldn't trust government. And so we find that during the Ford administration, there wasn't a lot of trust of government. And Gerald Ford was the president, therefore he was associated with the mistrust of government. It got a little worse for him when he visited Vienna, Austria, and as he was headed down the steps of Air Force One to shake hands with the chancellor, he tripped and fell. And that was pretty embarrassing. So twice in his administration, he tripped and fell on the steps of Air Force One. And of course, there's always cameras rolling for a United States president. At every time Marine One, the helicopter, leaves the White House, there is a cameraman and a photographer taking pictures and video of the president leaving. It's the death watch. There's always this idea that if something happens to the president, we need a last picture or a last video of that individual. So there's always cameras rolling. And you should Google Gerald Ford falls down steps. Now, what you're likely to find is the Saturday Night Live routines that show Gerald Ford falling down a variety of steps, falling over Christmas trees, fumbling over a desk. Gerald Ford, after falling down the steps, Gerald Ford was considered kind of a fumbling buffoon. And that's not fair to his historical record, but public perception sometimes is more powerful than historical record. So Ford was largely the laughing stock of the United States. We have an era where the countercultural revolution has run its course. There is an entire generation that has a distrust of U.S. government. The two politicians that he took over for were actual criminals. And so not only is the Republican Party tainted, but Gerald Ford's reputation is tainted by association. And it's not fair to him. He was one of our better public servants during his lifetime, and we should remember him well, but America doesn't. So actually, the only thing I'm going to ask you to do today is to, when you turn off this video, is to look up Gerald Ford falling down the steps of Air Force One. It's like a 30-second clip, and you'll see the President of the United States falling down some stairs. Saturday Night Live mocked it for his entire administration. For years, the Chevy Chase, an actor on Saturday Night Live, portrayed Gerald Ford as kind of an idiot in a lot of ways, and that crafted his legacy. Unfortunately, his legacy was crafted by Saturday Night Live, and media has the power to do that. Maybe you look up Saturday Night Live Gerald Ford Chevy Chase, and it will be, I mean, some of it's funny, I gotta admit. I grew up watching it, and it was hilarious. You may not get a lot of the references because you would have had to live through the Ford administration, but you'll get most of it. Now that I've explained it, you'll understand why he's perceived that way. The other character they sometimes introduce or reference on the phone is his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. So when he says Henry, it's his Secretary of State. Tomorrow, this video is short today because Ford, we don't have a whole lot of content for Ford. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Jimmy Carter, and then on Wednesday we're going to have our Zoom meeting. The Carter administration is problematic for me. I didn't like Jimmy Carter as a president to this day. I don't rate his presidency very high, but Jimmy Carter was a great man, is a great man. He's alive right now. And it's going to be complicated a little bit because I don't like Jimmy Carter as president, but as a human being, you're not going to find a better human being than Jimmy Carter. And so I've got two Jimmy Carters in my head, and I am biased against one and for another. And so that's going to be a little complicated, and I'll rationalize it for you. I'll give you the facts, and then I'll tell you my bias and why I think that way. So I left my glasses in the classroom today when I went in to update the lessons. So I've got these glasses that are like my backup to my backup to my backup glasses. So tomorrow I'll have to go in and get my real glasses, so I'll be back to normal. I hope you're doing well. I kind of slept. I just took like a 2-hour nap, so I'm doing great. But it looks like it's going to rain, so I have to finish the video and go inside. Hope you're doing well.